The worst spy in the Northern Territories knew exactly 3 things about her mission: find the Alpha King, uncover his secrets, and absolutely do not get distracted. Evelyn Hart repeated those instructions to herself for the 15th time, as the royal carriage rattled over the cobblestone road leading into Blackthorn City. The words had sounded simple enough back in her village. They sounded considerably less convincing now. She pressed a folded letter deeper into her coat pocket and stared out the window. Towering stone walls rose against the pale morning sky. Banners bearing the silver wolf crest of the kingdom fluttered above crowded streets. Merchants shouted from market stalls. Horses trotted past fountains. Everything felt larger than life. Somewhere inside that sprawling city lived Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn, the most powerful wolf in the territory. Depending on who was telling the story, he was either a brilliant ruler, a terrifying strategist, or a cold-hearted tyrant who never smiled. Evelyn had been sent to discover which version was true. The carriage finally stopped beside the royal kitchens. Her stomach twisted. This was it. She adjusted the plain apron she would wear as part of her disguise and stepped down onto the stone pavement. A cool breeze brushed against her cheeks. She took one determined breath. Then another. Then her attention was completely stolen by the smell of honey. Evelyn froze. The scent drifted through the air like pure temptation. Warm honey, fresh butter, cinnamon, baked apples. Her mission immediately became less important than discovering where that smell was coming from. She followed it through the servants' entrance, past bustling cooks and stacks of copper pans, until she found the source. Rows upon rows of golden honey cakes rested on cooling racks beneath the morning sunlight. For a moment she simply stared. They looked perfect. Soft golden tops. Drizzles of honey catching the light. Tiny curls of steam rising into the air. One of the bakers noticed her expression and laughed. First day. Evelyn nodded. Is it that obvious? Only because everyone reacts the same way. The baker pointed proudly toward the trays. The king's favorite. Evelyn blinked. The Alpha King likes honey cakes? Loves them. Somehow that fact alone felt surprising. She had expected stories about battle plans and royal decrees. Not desserts. A few minutes later she found herself carrying a basket of fresh ingredients deeper into the kitchen. Her mission briefing echoed faintly in her memory. Observe the king. Learn his habits. Discover weaknesses. Evelyn glanced toward the honey cakes. This probably counted as research. At least that was what she told herself. By noon she had learned exactly one thing. The Alpha King enjoyed honey cakes every Wednesday. By early afternoon she had learned a second thing. The palace staff genuinely liked working for him. That detail bothered her more than it should have. Tyrants were not supposed to inspire loyalty. They were supposed to inspire fear. Yet every servant she met spoke of King Adrian with warmth and respect. As the sun dipped lower across the palace courtyards, Evelyn carried a tray of supplies toward a storage room and accidentally stepped into an open hallway overlooking the royal gardens. She stopped. Below, fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon light. Flowering trees swayed gently in the breeze. And seated alone on a stone bench was a man dressed in dark clothing. A large gray cat occupied most of his lap. Evelyn watched as the man patiently offered the cat tiny pieces of honey cake. The animal accepted each bite with regal approval. The man smiled. It was brief, genuine, unexpectedly warm. Evelyn stared. The cat purred. The man laughed softly. And for the first time since arriving at the palace, Evelyn experienced a sudden and alarming realization. If that was Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn, then absolutely nothing about this mission was going according to plan. Evelyn spent the rest of that afternoon trying very hard not to think about the king feeding honey cake to a cat. Unfortunately, her brain refused to cooperate. Every time she carried flour across the kitchen, she remembered the faint smile she had seen in the garden. Every time someone mentioned the king, the image returned. It was deeply inconvenient. Spies were supposed to collect useful information. She had collected evidence that the ruler of the Northern Territories shared desserts with animals. By evening, she sat alone in a tiny servant room above the kitchens, staring at the blank report sheet hidden inside her trunk. The candle beside her flickered softly. She dipped her pen into ink and began writing. Subject: Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn. She paused. Then she added, appears unusually fond of honey cakes. Evelyn stared at the sentence. It looked ridiculous. She crossed it out. She tried again. Subject maintains strong relationships with palace staff. Better. Slightly. She tapped the pen against her chin. Several moments later she added, has a cat. The moment the words appeared on the page, she groaned and dropped her forehead onto the desk. This was not intelligence gathering. This was embarrassment written in ink. The next morning began before sunrise. The palace kitchens exploded into activity long before the city fully woke. Bakers moved between ovens. Apprentices rushed trays across the room. Fresh bread filled the air with warmth. Evelyn tied on her apron and joined the morning rush. She was carrying a basket of apples toward the preparation tables when she overheard two senior cooks talking nearby. The king is visiting the East Orphanage today. Again. Third visit this month. Evelyn slowed slightly. Does he visit often? She asked. One of the cooks nodded. Whenever he can. The children adore him. Another inconvenient detail. Tyrants were not supposed to spend their mornings visiting orphanages. Throughout the day, more stories emerged. A stable hand mentioned that the king personally funded repairs for farms damaged during winter storms. A housekeeper recalled him remembering the names of servants she had worked with for years. A gardener swore he once spent half an hour helping a frightened child find a lost puppy during a public festival. Evelyn listened carefully. Every story chipped away at the image she had expected to find. By late afternoon she found herself standing near an open window overlooking one of the palace courtyards. Below, several officials hurried between meetings carrying stacks of documents. In the center of the courtyard stood Adrian Blackthorne. This time there was no cat. No honey cake. No quiet garden. He wore a dark coat trimmed with silver. Advisors surrounded him. Guards stood nearby. Even from a distance his presence changed the atmosphere. People listened when he spoke. They moved with confidence when he gave instructions. Yet there was nothing harsh about the scene. No raised voices. No intimidation. Just calm authority. Evelyn watched as an elderly servant approached carrying a heavy crate. Before anyone else reacted, Adrian stepped forward and took one side of the load himself. The servant looked startled. The king simply smiled and exchanged a few words before continuing on his way. Evelyn blinked. Beside her, another kitchen worker laughed softly. You are staring again. I am not. You absolutely are. Heat crept into Evelyn's cheeks. She turned away from the window immediately. The worker grinned. Careful. Careful of what? The king has that effect on people. Evelyn opened her mouth to argue. Then she stopped. Because somewhere deep down, a small and increasingly annoying part of her suspected the woman might be right. 3 days into her assignment, Evelyn Hart came to a deeply troubling conclusion. She was possibly the least effective spy in the history of espionage. The realization struck her while standing in the palace kitchens at 6:30 in the morning, staring at a tray of honey cakes instead of gathering intelligence. Around her, cooks moved briskly between ovens and preparation tables. Fresh sunlight spilled through tall windows. The scent of cinnamon and honey filled the room. Somewhere in the distance, bells announced the start of another busy day inside Blackthorne Palace. Evelyn was supposed to be documenting military schedules and political alliances. Instead, she knew exactly how many honey cakes the king preferred with breakfast. 4. The answer was 4. 5 on particularly stressful days, according to one baker who seemed strangely proud of that information. She sighed and adjusted the folded report hidden inside her apron pocket. The report remained embarrassingly empty. At breakfast she learned the king preferred tea over coffee. At lunch she learned he often skipped meals when dealing with official matters. By afternoon she learned he always thanked the kitchen staff regardless of how busy he was. None of this felt useful. Yet somehow she could not stop collecting these details. Late that morning a head cook suddenly pointed toward her. You. Evelyn looked up. Me. Take this tray to the West Council Chamber. Evelyn blinked. The council chamber? That is generally where council meetings happen. Several cooks laughed. Before she could object, a tray was pressed into her hands. Her pulse immediately quickened. This was different. Important officials met inside the council chamber. Conversations happened there. Decisions happened there. Real information happened there. Finally, an actual opportunity. She carefully carried the tray through winding corridors lined with silver banners and polished stone. As she approached the chamber doors, 2 guards stepped aside to allow servants through. Evelyn entered quietly. The room was larger than she expected. Sunlight streamed across a long wooden table covered with maps and documents. Advisors sat on both sides. At the far end sat Adrian Blackthorne. Evelyn immediately focused on looking professional. Unfortunately, her professionalism lasted approximately 7 seconds. Because the first thing she heard was not military strategy. It was Adrian saying, "Who moved my honey cakes?" Silence followed. One advisor slowly raised a hand. "Your Majesty, we thought perhaps fewer distractions would improve efficiency." Adrian stared at him. "You removed morale." Another advisor covered a smile. The room visibly relaxed. Laughter followed. Evelyn nearly dropped the tray. That was not how she imagined royal council meetings. She set refreshments on the table as quietly as possible. Before leaving, she risked one quick glance toward the king. Adrian looked up at exactly the wrong moment. Their eyes met. Evelyn froze. For a second she forgot how walking worked. Then Adrian offered a polite nod. Nothing more. Nothing dramatic. Just simple acknowledgement. Somehow that felt worse. She escaped the room moments later with her heart racing for reasons she preferred not to examine. That evening she finally forced herself to complete a proper report. Sitting alone at her small desk beneath the glow of a lantern, she wrote carefully. The Alpha King appears respected by advisors and staff. Leadership style remains cooperative rather than authoritarian. She paused. Then she added another note. Subject maintains unusual emotional attachment to honey cakes. Evelyn stared at the sentence. She should have crossed it out. She knew she should have crossed it out. Instead she left it there. Somewhere across the kingdom, her handlers were expecting secrets capable of changing political fortunes. Meanwhile, she was documenting dessert preferences. What Evelyn did not realize was that while she sat upstairs questioning her competence, another report was being delivered elsewhere in the palace. A royal security officer stood before Adrian Blackthorne and quietly handed him a sealed document. Adrian opened it, skimmed the contents, and smiled to himself. "Evelyn Hart," he murmured softly. Then he folded the report and slipped it into his pocket. Because unlike Evelyn, the Alpha King was already learning exactly who was watching whom. If Evelyn Hart had known the Alpha King already knew her name, she probably would have handled the next week very differently. Unfortunately, she remained blissfully unaware. Which was exactly why Adrian Blackthorne found the situation so fascinating. The first report about Evelyn had landed on his desk the day she arrived. His security officers had noticed inconsistencies in her background almost immediately. Her references were valid but unusually vague. Her travel records contained small gaps. Nothing alarming. Nothing dangerous. Just enough to attract attention. Adrian had expected to uncover an experienced spy sent by a rival territory. Instead, every new report became increasingly confusing. On the morning of the 4th day, one officer summarized her activities with visible frustration. She spent 20 minutes asking a baker for a honey cake recipe. Adrian looked up from his paperwork. "And that is the entire report." Another officer cleared his throat. "Yesterday, she spent half an hour helping an elderly groundskeeper move flower pots." Adrian fought the urge to smile. Very suspicious. The officers exchanged glances. They were not entirely certain whether their king was joking anymore. The truth was simple. Adrian should have removed her from the palace immediately. Any ruler with common sense would have. Yet every time he considered doing so, another report arrived. Evelyn comforting a frightened kitchen apprentice. Evelyn helping organize food deliveries. Evelyn staying late to assist servants she barely knew. None of it matched the profile of someone sent to create problems. If anything, she seemed determined to improve the lives of everyone around her. By the end of the week, Adrian found himself looking forward to the daily updates. Across the palace, Evelyn was having a completely different crisis. She still had not discovered a single meaningful secret. Worse, her reports back home were becoming increasingly ridiculous. Sitting beside her small bedroom window one evening, she reread the latest draft. The Alpha King remains highly respected by staff and citizens. He appears approachable. He demonstrates strong leadership skills. He owns at least one very spoiled cat. Evelyn closed her eyes. This was a disaster. Her handlers expected strategic intelligence. She was accidentally writing character references. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly hid the report beneath a blanket. "Come in." The door opened. A young servant named Clara stepped inside carrying a basket. The kitchen sent extras. Evelyn looked down. "Honey cakes. Of course. You are becoming predictable," Clara teased. "I am not. You absolutely are." Evelyn laughed despite herself. After Clara left, she carried one of the cakes to the open window. Outside, the palace gardens glowed beneath hundreds of lanterns. Music drifted faintly from somewhere deeper within the city. The evening air smelled of flowers and fresh rain. For the first time since arriving, she realized she was genuinely happy here. The thought startled her. Happiness had never been part of the mission. The next morning brought another surprise. The head cook approached her. During breakfast preparations, the king requested additional honey cakes today. Evelyn nodded. "That seems normal. Specifically yours." She nearly dropped the mixing bowl. "Mine." "Apparently." The cook shrugged. He enjoyed the last batch. Heat rushed into her cheeks. She remembered helping decorate several trays earlier that week. At the time she assumed they were destined for ordinary guests. Now she suddenly felt very aware of every uneven drizzle of honey she had placed on top. Throughout the morning, she found herself distracted by the thought. By noon she finally delivered the tray personally. As she entered the royal library, Adrian sat alone beside a tall window reading documents. Sunlight illuminated silver strands hidden within his dark hair. He looked up when she approached. "Thank you," he said warmly. "The honey cakes have become the highlight of my week." Evelyn forgot every prepared response. "You are welcome, Your Majesty." Adrian smiled. "I hope you continue making them." It was a simple conversation, barely a minute long. Yet as Evelyn walked back toward the kitchens, her pulse refused to settle. What she did not see was Adrian watching her leave with amusement in his silver eyes. Because while Evelyn still believed she was secretly studying the king, Adrian had quietly begun studying her. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Evelyn would remember that detail later because the day had begun so normally. The palace kitchens bustled with their usual energy. Bakers argued cheerfully over recipes. Apprentices hurried between ovens. Fresh loaves cooled beside open windows. Everything felt familiar now, comfortable even, which was exactly why the folded note waiting beneath her pillow made her stomach drop. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It came from the people who had sent her here. Her handlers. Evelyn locked her bedroom door before opening it. The message was short. Too short. "Report immediately. New intelligence required. Confirm rumors regarding palace security weaknesses. Deliver findings within 72 hours. She read it twice. Then a third time. The paper suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Security weaknesses. Until now her reports had been mostly harmless observations. They had tolerated her lack of useful information because she remained inside the palace. This request was different. They wanted details that could actually matter. Real vulnerabilities. Real access points. For the first time since arriving, Evelyn felt the weight of her assignment settle firmly onto her shoulders. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. Throughout the morning she found herself distracted. Every hallway suddenly looked different. Every guard station. Every locked door. She hated it. More than that, she hated the uncomfortable feeling growing in her chest whenever she imagined someone using that information against the people who worked here. Against Clara. Against the bakers. Against the groundskeepers who greeted her every morning. Against Adrian. Especially Adrian. By afternoon, a steady rain drifted across Blackthorn City. Gray clouds covered the sky. The palace courtyards emptied as servants hurried indoors. Evelyn carried a basket of fresh pastries through one of the quieter corridors when raised voices drifted from around a corner. She slowed instinctively. Several unfamiliar men stood near a side entrance speaking in low tones. Their clothing marked them as visiting nobles. Their expressions seemed tense. One of them glanced toward the nearest guard post before quickly looking away. Another unfolded a piece of paper. Evelyn could not hear everything they said. Only fragments. Enough to recognize concern. Enough to sense something was wrong. She stepped back before they noticed her. Her pulse quickened. For a moment she considered following them. Then common sense prevailed. She was a baker. A very questionable spy. Following suspicious nobles was probably beyond her qualifications. She hurried away. An hour later, she discovered she was not the only person who had noticed unusual behavior. The palace atmosphere had shifted. Guards moved more frequently through the corridors. Advisors appeared unusually busy. Quiet conversations stopped whenever strangers approached. Something was happening beneath the surface. Nobody seemed willing to discuss it openly. As evening approached, Evelyn carried a fresh tray of honeycakes toward the royal library. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Lantern light cast warm golden reflections across polished floors. When she entered, Adrian sat alone at a long table covered with documents. Yet this time he looked different. Not unhappy, not angry, just thoughtful. More burdened somehow. His attention lingered on a map spread across the desk. Evelyn set the tray down carefully. "Fresh from the kitchen, Your Majesty." Adrian looked up. A small smile appeared immediately. "You continue saving difficult days." The simple comment warmed her far more than it should have. Before she could stop herself, she asked, "Is everything all right?" The question slipped out naturally. Not as a servant, not as a spy, just as someone who genuinely wanted to know. Adrian studied her for a moment. Something unreadable flickered behind his silver eyes. Then he smiled again. "Nothing I cannot handle." Most people would have accepted that answer. Evelyn almost did. Yet she had spent enough time observing him to notice the difference between his public smile and his real one. This smile did not quite reach his eyes. As she walked back toward the kitchens, unease followed her. Somewhere inside the palace, something was unfolding. And for reasons she could not fully explain, she found herself hoping Adrian would be all right. The answer arrived 2 days later, hidden inside a flower shipment from the city market. Evelyn discovered the folded note while helping organize supplies in the pantry. At first she assumed it was another routine message from her handlers. By now she had grown used to the small knots of anxiety that accompanied every secret delivery. This time felt different almost immediately. The paper contained no greeting, no instructions, only a list of names. 6 names. Beneath them appeared dates, locations, and coded references she recognized from previous reports. Evelyn frowned as she studied the page. Then her blood ran cold. She knew 3 of the names. Not from her village. Not from the palace. From the group of visiting nobles she had overheard several days earlier. The same men whose conversation had seemed unusually tense. Her eyes moved lower across the page. One sentence stood alone at the bottom. "Confirm palace vulnerabilities before operation begins." Evelyn read it again. Then a third time. Operation. The word echoed unpleasantly in her mind. Her handlers had never used language like that before. They had always spoken about gathering information, observation, intelligence, preparation. This was different. Much different. She carefully folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. For the rest of the afternoon she struggled to focus. Every detail she had ignored suddenly demanded attention. The unusual behavior among palace staff. The increased security patrols. Adrian's distracted expression in the library. The visiting nobles. Somehow all of it connected. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Whatever her original mission had been, someone else had transformed it into something far more serious. That evening she climbed a narrow staircase leading to one of the palace observation balconies. The city stretched beneath her in a sea of golden lights. Rain clouds had finally disappeared, revealing a sky filled with stars. Normally she loved this view. Tonight she barely noticed it. She pulled the note from her pocket once more. None of this made sense. Her village leaders had never spoken about harming anyone. They feared Adrian's growing influence, certainly. They worried about losing independence. But this? Secret operations. Security weaknesses. Unknown allies inside the city. Felt wrong. The more she thought about it, the less she recognized the people she had trusted. You look troubled. Evelyn nearly jumped out of her skin. She turned sharply. Adrian stood several feet away near the balcony entrance. No guards. No advisors. Just Adrian. Her heart immediately forgot how to behave normally. Your Majesty. I was hoping for honesty. His tone remained gentle. You usually reserve that expression for burnt pastries. Despite herself, she laughed softly. Adrian stepped closer, resting one arm against the stone railing. Below them, city lights shimmered across the darkness. For a few moments, neither spoke. The silence felt strangely comfortable. Eventually, Adrian glanced toward her. Something is worrying you. It was not a question. Evelyn looked away. She wanted to tell him. The impulse surprised her. For weeks she had hidden everything. Protected her assignment. Protected her secrets. Yet standing beside him now, honesty felt easier than deception. That frightened her. Have you ever trusted someone completely? She asked quietly. And then discovered you might not know them at all? Adrian considered the question carefully. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. What did you do? I learned the truth. Evelyn stared at the city lights below. The truth. Somehow that sounded both simple and impossible. Adrian's voice softened. Sometimes the people we trust believe they are protecting us. Sometimes they are protecting themselves. His words lingered in the cool night air. Evelyn swallowed hard, because for the first time she began to wonder whether her mission had ever been about gathering information at all. What if she had simply been a tool? A convenient piece in someone else's plan? Beside her, Adrian remained quiet. He did not press for answers. He did not demand explanations. Yet as they stood together beneath the stars, Evelyn found herself facing a terrifying possibility. The greatest secret she had uncovered inside Blackthorn Palace was not about the Alpha King. It was about the people who had sent her there in the first place. For the next 2 days, Evelyn carried the weight of the truth everywhere she went. It followed her through the kitchens, through the gardens, through every corridor lined with silver banners. The folded note remained hidden inside her room, yet it felt as though she could hear it whispering every time she closed her eyes. Confirm palace vulnerabilities before operation begins. The words refused to leave her alone. Worse still, neither did Adrian. Not because he sought her out. Quite the opposite. After their conversation on the balcony, he seemed determined to give her space. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made her miss him. The realization arrived while she was decorating honey cakes one quiet afternoon. Clara had stepped away to collect ingredients. The ovens hummed softly. Sunlight warmed the countertops. Without thinking, Evelyn found herself glancing toward the doorway, wondering whether Adrian might appear. The moment she caught herself doing it, she nearly dropped the piping bag. This was becoming a serious problem. A far more serious problem than espionage, politics, or mysterious nobles. Because somewhere along the way, she had stopped observing the Alpha King as a mission and started caring about him as a person. That evening, another message arrived. This one was worse than the first. Meet contact at midnight. Final instructions required. Evelyn stared at the paper for a long time. Her hands felt cold. Midnight arrived far too quickly. Wrapped in a dark cloak, she slipped through a quiet servant entrance and crossed a deserted courtyard. Lanterns flickered in the distance. Clouds drifted across the moon. Near an old fountain hidden behind climbing ivy, a man waited. Evelyn recognized him immediately. He was one of the nobles whose name had appeared on the list. "You are late," he said. "I came as soon as I could." "Good." He handed her another sealed envelope. "The operation moves forward in 3 days." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. "What operation?" The noble frowned. "You were not informed?" No, for a moment he seemed annoyed. Then he lowered his voice. "The king has become too powerful. Several territories have agreed that changes are necessary." Changes. Such an innocent word. Yet the expression on his face made it sound anything but innocent. "And my role?" Evelyn asked carefully. "Continue providing information." He studied her. "You have gained unusual access. That is valuable." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed somewhere nearby. The noble immediately stepped backward into the shadows. "Remember where your loyalty belongs." Then he disappeared. Evelyn stood frozen beside the fountain. Loyalty. The word felt impossible now, because her loyalty no longer belonged where it once had. The realization struck with startling clarity. She did not trust the people directing this operation. She trusted Adrian. The next morning she made a decision. Terrified her. Yet once made, it also brought relief. She carried a tray of honeycakes toward the royal library with unusual determination. Her heart pounded harder with every step. When she entered, Adrian sat beside the window exactly as before. Papers covered the desk. Sunlight illuminated the room. He looked up and immediately noticed something was wrong. Evelyn. His voice softened. What happened? She set the tray down carefully. Then she took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. Adrian remained silent. Waiting. Patient. Calm. For a moment Evelyn almost lost her courage. Then she remembered the notes. The lies. The operation. I was sent here with a purpose, she admitted quietly. Adrian's expression did not change. Not even slightly. I know. The room fell completely silent. Evelyn blinked. You know. Adrian nodded. I have known since the day you arrived. Her breath caught. You knew I was spying on you? Yes. And you let me stay? A faint smile appeared. Warm. Genuine. Familiar. Evelyn, your reports included detailed observations about honeycakes, cats, and whether I skip lunch when I am busy. His silver eyes brightened with amusement. You were never particularly difficult to identify. Despite everything, a shocked laugh escaped her. Adrian leaned back slightly. The truth is, I stopped worrying about why you came here a long time ago. Evelyn stared at him. Her heart felt entirely too full. Why? She whispered. Adrian's gaze held hers. Steady and sincere. Because somewhere along the way you stopped being a spy. His smile softened further. You simply became Evelyn. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn slept peacefully. The burden of secrecy had finally lifted. Adrian knew the truth. More surprisingly, he had known it almost from the beginning. Yet somehow he had chosen trust over suspicion. The thought followed her through the next morning like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Unfortunately, reality returned before breakfast. Another note waited outside her bedroom door. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her handlers. Her stomach tightened before she even unfolded the paper. The message contained only one sentence. Final confirmation required. Deliver information within 24 hours, or be considered compromised. Evelyn stared at the words for a long moment. There it was. The choice she had been avoiding. Until now she had convinced herself there might be another solution. A way to satisfy both sides. A path that allowed her to remain loyal to her village, while protecting the people she had come to care about. The note destroyed that illusion completely. They were no longer asking for information. They were demanding obedience. Throughout the morning she moved through the kitchens in a haze of uncertainty. Clara noticed immediately. You look like someone stole your favorite dessert. Evelyn forced a smile. It is not that bad. That is exactly what someone says when it is that bad. Normally the comment would have made her laugh. Today it only deepened the ache in her chest. By noon she found herself standing alone in the palace gardens. Summer flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Everything looked peaceful. Yet inside her mind, a war of loyalties continued. Her village had raised her, protected her, given her purpose. Yet the people directing this operation no longer felt familiar. Their demands felt colder with every message. More distant. More dangerous. Across the palace grounds, she noticed children playing near one of the public courtyards. Several had traveled with merchants visiting the capital. Their laughter carried across the gardens. Nearby, an elderly gardener patiently helped a little girl replant a flower she had accidentally uprooted. Evelyn watched the scene quietly. Then she understood something important. The people she had been asked to betray were not symbols. They were not political obstacles. They were real. The cooks. The servants. The families. The children. Adrian. Suddenly the decision became much easier. That evening she requested a private meeting. Adrian received her in the same library where so many of their conversations had begun. The room glowed with warm lantern light. Rain tapped softly against the windows once again, as if the weather itself had returned to where their story changed. Adrian looked up from his desk as she entered. You made a decision. It was not a question. Evelyn nodded. I did. She crossed the room and placed every note she had received onto the desk between them. Every instruction. Every warning. Every demand. Adrian glanced down at the papers but did not immediately read them. Instead, he looked at her. Are you certain? The question surprised her. He was giving her one final chance to walk away. One final opportunity to choose differently. Evelyn drew a slow breath. Then she nodded again. I am. The answer felt steady. Honest. True. Adrian's expression softened. Not with triumph. Not with relief. With understanding. Thank you, he said quietly. Evelyn smiled faintly. Do you know the strange part? What is that? When I first arrived, I thought I was here to discover your secrets. Adrian leaned back slightly. And what did you discover? She laughed softly. That you like honey cakes, feed stray cats, skip lunch when you are busy, and somehow convinced an entire kingdom to genuinely like you. A warm smile appeared immediately. Those are highly classified details. For the first time in days, Evelyn laughed without reservation. The sound echoed gently through the library. Outside, rain continued falling across Blackthorn City. Inside, the future remained uncertain. Questions still needed answers. Plans still needed unraveling. But one thing had finally become clear. Evelyn Hart no longer belonged to the mission that had brought her here. She had chosen her side. And for the first time since arriving at the palace, she felt completely at peace with that choice. The storm everyone had been expecting never arrived. At least not in the way they imagined. The documents Evelyn provided allowed Adrian and his advisors to uncover the truth before rumors could become disasters. Meetings were held. Questions were answered. Hidden agreements between several nobles were quietly exposed. By choosing honesty, Evelyn had helped prevent confusion from spreading across the territories. No dramatic confrontation followed. No grand spectacle unfolded. Instead, something far rarer happened. The truth came into the light. And once it did, most of the shadows disappeared on their own. 2 weeks later, Blackthorn City felt brighter than it had in months. Summer festivals filled the streets. Musicians performed in public squares. Merchants decorated their storefronts with ribbons and lanterns. Children raced through crowded markets carrying paper wolves on strings. From the palace kitchens, Evelyn watched the celebration through an open window, while carefully arranging trays of pastries for the evening reception. You are smiling again, Clara observed. I smile all the time. No, Clara pointed dramatically. That smile. Evelyn immediately looked away. I do not know what you mean. Of course you do. Clara laughed and disappeared before Evelyn could defend herself. Unfortunately, Clara was right. Evelyn had been smiling more lately. Life felt lighter. The constant pressure had vanished. For the first time since arriving at the palace, she no longer carried secrets heavy enough to keep her awake at night. Better still, she no longer needed excuses to spend time with Adrian. Their conversations had become a natural part of each day. Sometimes they discussed books. Sometimes city projects. Sometimes absolutely nothing important at all. Those moments often became her favorites. Late that afternoon, a royal messenger arrived in the kitchens. His Majesty requests your presence in the Great Hall. Evelyn blinked. Now. Immediately. Her heart skipped. Requests from the king tended to do that. 20 minutes later she stood outside the Great Hall doors, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her apron. The room beyond buzzed with conversation. Guests from across the territories filled the hall. Noble families, merchants, advisors, palace staff. Nearly everyone seemed to be attending the festival gathering. The doors opened. Evelyn stepped inside. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the enormous chamber. Music drifted softly through the air. For a moment she simply stood there, overwhelmed by the size of it all. Then she noticed Adrian waiting near the center of the room. He looked entirely too pleased with himself. That alone made her suspicious. Your Majesty, she said as she approached. Why am I here? Excellent question. Adrian held up a small wooden box. I have something important. Evelyn stared at the box. That is either wonderful or deeply concerning. Laughter rippled from several nearby guests who had clearly been listening. Adrian looked offended. Have a little faith. You once hid an entire basket of honeycakes because someone threatened palace morale. That was a leadership decision. More laughter followed. Evelyn shook her head, smiling despite herself. Adrian opened the wooden box. Inside rested several perfectly decorated honeycakes. The sight immediately made her laugh. You summoned me for dessert? Partially. His silver eyes softened. The playful confidence remained, but something more sincere appeared beneath it. When you first arrived, you were supposed to be observing me. Evelyn groaned quietly. Please do not remind me. I think I must. Adrian lifted one honeycake from the box. You came looking for secrets. I did. And instead, Evelyn glanced around the hall. At the palace staff, the city leaders, the friends she had made. Finally, she looked back at Adrian. Instead, I found people worth caring about. Silence settled gently across the room. Warm and comfortable. Adrian smiled. Good. Then he handed her the honeycake. Because I was hoping you might stay. The simplicity of the question made her eyes sting unexpectedly. Not because she was sad. Because somewhere along the way this place had become home. Evelyn accepted the honeycake. I think, she said softly, that I already have. Applause broke out almost immediately. Clara looked unbearably smug. Someone started cheering. Even the palace cat appeared from nowhere, as if determined to participate in the celebration. Adrian laughed. Evelyn laughed with him. And beneath the glow of hundreds of lanterns, surrounded by the people who had changed her life, the worst spy in the Northern Territories finally discovered the thing she had been searching for all along. Not secrets. Not missions. Not hidden plans. Just a place where she belonged.